August 18, 1227. High summer on the vast steppes of western Sia. The greatest conqueror the world has ever known lies dying in his felt tent, his weathered hands clutching the reins of an empire that stretches from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Temüjin, who became Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, draws his final breaths as thunder rolls across the endless grasslands where his ancestors once roamed as simple herders. But this man's bloodline carries within it the echoes of 1,000 generations, a genetic tapestry woven from the nomadic tribes who shaped the very soul of the Eurasian steppes. The story of Genghis Khan's lineage begins not with his birth, but in the mists of prehistory, when the first Mongol tribes emerged from the harsh landscapes of what is now Mongolia and southern Siberia. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Proto-Mongolic peoples established themselves in these regions around 1000 BCE, developing the horseback culture that would define their descendants for millennia. These early nomads, ancestors to the Great Khan, learned to survive in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments, where winter temperatures plummet to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and summer brings scorching heat across seemingly endless grasslands. By 200 CE, the ancestral tribes had begun forming loose confederations under powerful chieftains. Chinese records from the Han dynasty mention encounters with fierce nomadic warriors who bore striking resemblances to the later Mongol peoples. Among these early tribal groupings, one particular clan emerged that would eventually produce the most famous conqueror in human history. The Borjigin clan, whose name translates to blue-eyed ones, traced their mythical origins to a blue-gray wolf named Bertecino and a fallow deer called Ko-ai Maral, who supposedly mated on the shores of Lake Baikal and produced the first Mongol. Around 450 CE, during the tumultuous period following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a chieftain named Bodon Char emerged as a significant figure in early Mongol genealogy. According to the secret history of the Mongols, written decades after Genghis Khan's death, Bodon Char was the legendary founder of the Borjigin lineage. Historical records suggest he lived during the mid-5th century, when nomadic confederations were reshaping the political landscape across Central Asia. Bodon Char reportedly possessed extraordinary abilities as both warrior and diplomat, uniting several fractured tribes under his leadership through a combination of military prowess and strategic marriages. Bodon Char's son, Barim Shira, continued this tradition of tribal leadership around 480 CE. Chinese chronicles from the Northern Wei dynasty describe encounters with Mongol raiders led by chieftains whose descriptions match later. Borjigin characteristics. Barim Shira allegedly expanded his father's tribal confederation, extending Mongol influence more profoundly into the steppes and establishing trade relationships with sedentary peoples along the Silk Road. His descendants would carry forward both his military traditions and his understanding of commerce, traits that would prove crucial in Genghis Khan's later empire-building efforts. The genealogical line continued through Bazak, who lived approximately 520 CE. During the height of the Byzantine Empire under Justinian the Tsar, Bazak reportedly distinguished himself in conflicts against the emerging Turkic Khaganate, demonstrating the tactical flexibility that would become a hallmark of Mongol warfare. His understanding of mounted archery and psychological warfare techniques passed down through oral tradition, eventually reaching the Great Khan himself. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasing sophistication in Mongol metalworking and horse breeding, suggesting that Bazak's era marked significant technological advancement within the tribal confederation. Around 560 CE, as the Western world witnessed the rise of the Lombard kingdom in Italy, Bazak's descendant Tumbinai emerged as a prominent tribal leader. Chinese records from the Sui dynasty period describe him as a cunning negotiator who managed to maintain Mongol independence despite pressure from larger confederations. Tumbinai's political acumen became legendary among his people, and stories of his diplomatic victories were recounted around campfires for generations. His ability to balance relationships between rival powers while strengthening his own position provided a template that Genghis Khan would later employ on a vastly larger scale. The lineage progressed through several more generations, with each leader contributing to the accumulated wisdom and military tradition that would eventually produce the world's greatest conqueror. Around 640 CE, contemporary with the early Islamic conquests in the Middle East, Kublai Khan emerged as perhaps the most significant pre-Genghis ancestor. Historical sources suggest he lived during a period of increasing Mongol unity, successfully resisting attempts by the Jin dynasty to divide and conquer the steppe tribes. Kublai Khan's military innovations, particularly his development of coordinated cavalry tactics and his emphasis on mobility over static defense, laid crucial groundwork for his descendants' future conquests. Kublai Khan's son, Bartan Bagatur, continued this military tradition around 680 CE, during the Umayyad Caliphate's expansion across North Africa and Spain. Mongol oral histories credit Bartan with developing the decimal military organization system that Genghis Khan would later perfect, dividing his forces into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. This organizational structure provided unprecedented flexibility and command efficiency, allowing Mongol forces to coordinate complex maneuvers across vast distances. Bartan's innovations in military logistics, including the development of the composite bow and improvements in horse breeding techniques, significantly enhanced Mongol military capabilities. The bloodline reached another crucial juncture with Yesugei Bagatur, Genghis Khan's father, born around 1134 CE during the height of the Crusades in the Holy Land. Yesugei emerged as a powerful chieftain within the Borjigin clan, controlling territories along the Onon and Kurlan rivers in what is now eastern Mongolia. Contemporary accounts describe him as a formidable warrior who stood nearly 6 feet tall, an unusual height for Mongols of his era, with piercing eyes that seemed to look directly into men's souls. His reputation extended far beyond his immediate tribal territory, earning him recognition among the various confederations that comprised the fragmented Mongol political landscape. Yesugei's military campaigns against rival tribes, particularly his conflicts with the Tatars, who had long been enemies of the Mongols, established him as one of the most respected war leaders of his generation. His tactical innovations, including the use of feigned retreats to draw enemies into carefully prepared ambushes, became standard elements of Mongol warfare. More significantly, Yesugei understood the importance of alliances in the fractured political environment of 12th century Mongolia. His diplomatic marriages and treaty arrangements with other tribal leaders created a network of relationships that his son would later exploit to unite the Mongol tribes under a single banner. Around 1155 CE, while European nobles were preparing for the Second Crusade and the Song dynasty ruled southern China, Yesugei arranged his own marriage to Hoelun, a woman from the Ulkunut tribe. This union represented more than personal attraction. It was a calculated political alliance designed to strengthen Borjigin influence within the broader Mongol Confederation. Hoelun brought with her not only tribal connections, but also a fierce intelligence and political acumen that would prove crucial in raising the future world conqueror. Contemporary accounts describe her as exceptionally beautiful, with the pale skin and fine features prized among the Mongol nobility. Still, her actual value lay in her understanding of tribal politics and her ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and enmities that characterized steppe society. The marriage between Yesugei and Hoelun took place during a period of increasing tension among the Mongol tribes. The Jin dynasty, ruling northern China, had begun implementing a deliberate policy of divide and conquer, providing military support to different tribal factions to prevent the emergence of a unified Mongol confederation. This Chinese strategy, known as using barbarians to control barbarians, had proven effective for decades, keeping the steppe peoples fragmented and manageable. However, leaders like Yesugei began recognizing the long-term threat this posed to Mongol independence and started working toward greater tribal unity. On a bitter winter night in 1162 CE, as snowstorms swept across the Mongolian steppes and the aurora borealis painted the sky in ethereal green flames, Hoelun gave birth to her first son. The child emerged clutching a blood clot in his right hand, which the tribal shamans interpreted as an omen of future greatness and conquest. They named him Temüjin, after a Tatar chieftain Yesugei had recently defeated in battle, following the Mongol tradition of naming children after conquered enemies to absorb their strength and spirit. From his earliest days, Temüjin displayed characteristics that set him apart from other children in the tribal confederation. Contemporary accounts describe him as unusually intelligent and observant, with an uncanny ability to understand adult conversations and political implications far beyond his years. His physical appearance also marked him as different. At the same time, most Mongols had dark hair and eyes. Temüjin possessed reddish-brown hair and green eyes, traits that tribal elders associated with supernatural power and divine favor. These distinctive features, combined with his intense personality and natural leadership abilities, convinced many within the Borjigin clan that this child was destined for extraordinary achievements. Yesugei took personal responsibility for his eldest son's education, teaching him the essential skills of steppe warfare and tribal leadership. The boy learned to ride before he could walk properly, mastering the complex art of mounted archery while controlling his horse with only his knees and body weight. More importantly, Yesugei instructed Temüjin in the subtle arts of politics and diplomacy, explaining the intricate relationships between different tribal factions and the historical grievances that shaped contemporary conflicts. These lessons proved invaluable when circumstances later forced the young man to navigate the treacherous world of steppe politics without his father's protection. The education of a future Khan involved more than military and political training. Temüjin learned the sacred traditions of his people, including the shamanistic beliefs that connected the Mongols to their natural environment and ancestral spirits. He studied the movement of stars across the night sky, understanding how celestial navigation could guide armies across thousands of miles of seemingly identical grassland. The boy also absorbed the oral histories of his people, memorizing genealogies and battle stories that stretched back through dozens of generations. This comprehensive education created a foundation of knowledge and skills that would prove essential when Temüjin began his conquest of the known world. Tragedy struck the Borjigin clan in 1171 CE when Yesugei died suddenly after being poisoned by Tatar enemies during what appeared to be a peaceful diplomatic meeting. The loss of their charismatic leader left the clan vulnerable to rivals who had long resented Borjigin influence within the tribal confederation. Many of Yesugei's followers abandoned Hoelun and her children, taking their herds and warriors to join more powerful chieftains who could offer better protection and greater opportunities for wealth and advancement. This abandonment reduced the once proud Borjigin clan to near poverty, forcing them to survive on the margins of Mongol society as they struggled to maintain their traditional status and dignity. The years following Yesugei's death proved crucial in shaping Temüjin's character and worldview. The harsh realities of survival on the steppes, where weakness meant death and strength determined everything, taught him lessons about power and loyalty that no amount of formal education could provide. He learned to hunt and fish to supplement his family's meager resources, developing the self-reliance and physical toughness that would serve him well in future campaigns. More importantly, he witnessed firsthand how quickly allies could become enemies when circumstances changed, creating a cynical understanding of human nature that would influence his later political and military strategies. During this period of hardship, Temüjin began demonstrating the leadership qualities that would eventually make him history's greatest conqueror. When his half-brother Bektir challenged his authority within the family and threatened to seize control of their limited resources, Temüjin made the calculated decision to eliminate this potential rival. The killing of Bektir, accomplished with help from his younger brother Kasar, marked Temüjin's first decisive use of violence to achieve political objectives. This action established his dominance within his immediate family while demonstrating his willingness to employ extreme measures when necessary to protect his interests. The teenage Temujin's reputation began spreading throughout the tribal confederation, as stories of his intelligence and ruthlessness reached other chieftains. His childhood friendship with Jamukha, a charismatic young leader from the Jadaran tribe, initially seemed to offer hope for rebuilding Borjigin influence through alliance and mutual support. The two young men participated in traditional blood brotherhood ceremonies, swearing eternal loyalty and promising to share both victories and defeats. However, this relationship would eventually deteriorate into one of history's most significant personal rivalries, as both men possessed the ambition and ability to unite the Mongol tribes under their leadership. Around 1178 CE, as the Third Crusade was beginning in the Holy Land and the Kamakura period was establishing samurai dominance in Japan, Temüjin married Borte, a young woman from the Olkunut tribe who had been promised to him since childhood through arrangements made by his father. This marriage represented more than personal happiness. It was a crucial political alliance that began restoring Borjigin status within the tribal confederation. Berta brought with her not only tribal connections, but also a dowry of livestock and followers that significantly strengthened Temujin's position among potential rivals and allies. The marriage ceremony itself reflected the complex social and political relationships that governed steppe society. Representatives from dozens of tribes attended the celebration, using the occasion to negotiate treaties, arrange future marriages, and assess the relative strength of different factions. Temujin's handling of these negotiations demonstrated his growing political sophistication and his understanding of how personal relationships could be leveraged to achieve broader strategic objectives. The success of his wedding celebration marked his emergence as a serious contender for leadership within the Mongol Confederation. Shortly after his marriage, disaster struck when Merkid raiders attacked Temujin's camp and kidnapped Borte, seeking revenge for an earlier conflict involving Hoilun's abduction from their tribe decades earlier. This crisis forced Temujin to confront the harsh realities of steppe politics and the necessity of building military alliances to protect his interests. He approached both his blood brother Jamukha and Togrul, a mighty Khan of the Karaites who had been allied with his father, seeking assistance in rescuing his wife and punishing the Merkids for their aggression. The successful rescue of Berta marked Temujin's first major military victory and demonstrated his ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple tribal factions. The campaign against the Merkids required careful planning, precise timing, and the ability to maintain unity among allies with different motivations and objectives. Temujin's leadership during this crisis impressed many observers and began attracting followers who recognized his potential as a military commander. The victory also established essential precedents for his future campaigns, including the principle that attacks against his family and followers would be met with overwhelming retaliation. Following the Merkid campaign, Temujin began the long process of building the coalition that would eventually unite all Mongol tribes under his leadership. This effort required extraordinary political skill, as it involved reconciling ancient enemies, mediating territorial disputes, and creating new systems of loyalty and reward that could overcome traditional tribal divisions. Temujin understood that military conquest alone could not achieve lasting unity. He needed to address the economic and social factors that perpetuated conflict among the steppe peoples. His approach to tribal unification combined innovative military tactics with revolutionary social policies. Unlike traditional steppe leaders who relied primarily on kinship ties and tribal loyalty, Temujin began recruiting followers based on merit and personal devotion rather than family connections. This meritocratic approach allowed him to attract talented individuals from all tribal backgrounds while creating a more flexible and effective command structure. He also implemented policies protecting conquered peoples who submitted peacefully, offering them opportunities to join his confederation as equals rather than as subjugated enemies. The relationship between Temüjin and Jamuka gradually deteriorated as both men accumulated power and followers within the Mongol Confederation. Their rivalry reflected more profound philosophical differences about leadership and social organization. Jamuka represented the traditional aristocratic approach to steppe politics, maintaining that leadership should remain within established noble families and that conquered tribes should accept subordinate status. Temüjin, by contrast, advocated for a more egalitarian system where ability and loyalty determined advancement regardless of birth or tribal origin. These competing visions came to a head around 1187 CE, when the two former blood brothers found themselves leading opposing factions in an increasingly bitter civil war. The conflict that followed would determine not only the future of the Mongol tribes, but also the ultimate fate of much of the known world. Jamuka's coalition included many traditional tribal leaders who feared that Temüjin's reforms threatened their established privileges and authority. Temüjin's supporters, meanwhile, included many lower-ranking warriors and members of subordinate tribes who saw his leadership as an opportunity for advancement and improved social status. The decisive confrontation between these rival coalitions occurred at the Battle of Dağlıbalıcık, where Jamuka's forces initially gained the upper hand through superior numbers and cavalry tactics. However, Temüjin's ability to maintain discipline among his followers and his innovative use of coordinated archery formations eventually turned the tide in his favor. The victory established his reputation as a brilliant military strategist while demonstrating that his new organizational methods could defeat traditional steppe warfare techniques. Following his victory over Jamuka, Temüjin continued expanding his influence throughout the Mongol Confederation, systematically defeating or absorbing rival tribes while implementing his revolutionary social and military reforms. His treatment of conquered enemies set essential precedents for his later empire-building efforts. Leaders who submitted peacefully were often incorporated into his command structure, while those who continued resistance faced complete destruction. This combination of mercy for the submissive and ruthless punishment for the defiant became a hallmark of Mongol policy throughout their conquests. By 1196 CE, as the Fourth Crusade was being planned in Europe and the Song dynasty was dealing with Jin invasions in China, Temüjin had established himself as the dominant force within the Mongol tribal confederation. His military innovations, including the decimal organization system inherited from his ancestors and the integration of siege warfare techniques learned from Chinese defectors, gave his forces significant advantages over traditional steppe armies. More importantly, his political reforms had created unprecedented unity among people who had been fighting each other for centuries. The process of unifying the Mongol tribes required Temüjin to confront and defeat several other major leaders who had their own claims to supreme authority. Taichud leader Targutai Kiriltur, who had previously held Temüjin captive during his youth, represented the old aristocratic order that resisted his democratic reforms. The campaign against the Taichud demonstrated Temüjin's ability to combine military pressure with psychological warfare, using his knowledge of tribal customs and individual personalities to undermine enemy morale and encourage defections. Another significant opponent was Wang Khan, the Karaite leader who had initially supported Temüjin, but eventually turned against him when he realized the young Mongol's true ambitions. The conflict with Wang Khan proved particularly challenging because the Karaites were Christians who had established diplomatic relationships with both the Jin dynasty and various Central Asian kingdoms. Defeating them required Temüjin to develop new strategies for fighting enemies who possessed advanced military, technology, and external support. The final phase of Mongol unification involved the elimination of the Naiman tribe under Tayang Khan, who had assembled a coalition of remaining tribal groups in a last desperate attempt to prevent Temüjin's complete victory. The Battle of Chakarmaut in 1204 CE effectively ended organized resistance to Mongol unification, as Temüjin's forces decisively defeated the Naiman coalition through superior tactics and coordination. This victory eliminated the last major obstacle to his supremacy over the steppe peoples and cleared the way for his elevation to supreme leadership. In 1206 CE, at a great assembly called a Kurultai held near the headwaters of the Onan River, representatives from all Mongol tribes formally acknowledged Temüjin as their supreme leader, bestowing upon him the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. This moment marked the culmination of decades of warfare and political maneuvering, transforming a collection of fractious tribal groups into a unified nation capable of challenging the most extraordinary powers of the medieval world. The ceremony itself reflected the revolutionary nature of Temüjin's achievement, as it brought together people who had been enemies for generations, under a single banner and common purpose. The newly proclaimed Genghis Khan immediately began implementing comprehensive reforms designed to transform Mongol society from a collection of tribal confederations into a unified state capable of sustained military expansion. His legal code, known as the Yasa, established uniform laws governing everything from military discipline to commercial relationships. These laws reflected his understanding that lasting conquest required more than military victory. It demanded the creation of stable administrative systems that could govern diverse populations across vast distances. The military organization received particular attention in Genghis Khan's reforms. The traditional tribal structure was replaced with a decimal system, where armies were organized into units of 10,000, Tumen, 1,000, Minghan, 100, Chagun, and 10 Arban warriors. This system allowed for unprecedented coordination and flexibility while breaking down traditional tribal loyalties that might threaten unity. Command positions were filled based on merit rather than birth, creating opportunities for advancement that attracted talented individuals from all social backgrounds. The Mongol military machine that emerged from these reforms represented a revolutionary advancement in medieval warfare. Unlike European or Chinese armies that relied heavily on infantry formations and siege equipment, the Mongols emphasized mobility, coordination, and psychological warfare. Every warrior was a mounted archer capable of fighting effectively at long range, while maintaining the speed and flexibility necessary for rapid maneuvers across vast distances. This tactical approach proved devastatingly effective against enemies who were unprepared for such mobility and coordination. Genghis Khan's first major external campaign targeted the Western Xia Kingdom, a Tangut state that controlled crucial trade routes along the Silk Road. This invasion, beginning in 1209 CE, served multiple purposes beyond simple conquest. It provided his newly unified forces with combat experience against a sophisticated enemy, while testing the effectiveness of his military reforms. The campaign also demonstrated to potential enemies and allies that the Mongols were capable of projecting power far beyond their traditional steppe territories. The Western Xia campaign revealed both the strengths and limitations of early Mongol military capabilities. While their cavalry forces proved devastatingly effective in open terrain, the Mongols initially struggled with siege warfare against fortified cities. Genghis Khan responded to these challenges by recruiting Chinese and Central Asian engineers who could provide expertise in siege technology and urban warfare. This adaptability and willingness to adopt foreign techniques became a hallmark of Mongol military success throughout their conquests. Following the successful conclusion of the Western Xia campaign, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China and represented the greatest immediate threat to Mongol independence. The Jin had long pursued a policy of manipulating steppe politics to prevent tribal unification, making them natural enemies of the newly unified Mongol state. The invasion of Jin territory, beginning in 1211 CE, marked the start of the Mongol expansion that would eventually create the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Jin campaign demonstrated the full potential of Mongol military capabilities when properly coordinated and supplied. The speed and coordination of Mongol cavalry formations allowed them to outmaneuver larger Jin armies, while their psychological warfare techniques including the deliberate targeting of civilian populations, terrorized enemies into submission. The systematic destruction of cities that resisted Mongol authority established a pattern of conquest that would be repeated throughout their expansion across Asia and Europe. One of the most significant aspects of Genghis Khan's military strategy was his understanding of intelligence gathering and information warfare. Mongol armies were preceded by extensive spy networks that provided detailed information about enemy capabilities, political divisions, and economic resources. This intelligence allowed the Mongols to exploit weaknesses in enemy defenses while avoiding unnecessary casualties in their own forces. The systematic nature of Mongol intelligence operations was unprecedented in medieval warfare and contributed significantly to their consistent military success. The conquest of the Jin dynasty also revealed Genghis Khan's evolving approach to governance and administration. Rather than simply destroying conquered territories, he began implementing policies designed to maximize their economic and military potential. Skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators were spared and relocated to serve Mongol interests. At the same time, local populations that submitted peacefully were often allowed to maintain their traditional customs and religious practices under Mongol oversight. By 1215 CE, Mongol forces had captured Zhengdu, the Jin capital, marking a decisive victory that established their dominance over northern China. This conquest provided enormous wealth in the form of tribute, trade goods, and human resources, while demonstrating to the broader world that the Mongols were capable of defeating the most extraordinary powers of their time. The fall of Zhengdu sent shockwaves throughout Asia, as neighboring kingdoms realized that traditional military approaches were inadequate against this new form of warfare. The success against the Jin dynasty encouraged Genghis Khan to consider even more ambitious conquests, leading to the planning of campaigns against the Khwarezmid Empire in Central Asia and Persia. This western expansion would prove to be one of the most destructive military campaigns in human history, as the Mongols responded to Khwarezmid provocations with unprecedented violence and systematic destruction. The decision to invade westward reflected Genghis Khan's growing confidence in his military capabilities and his understanding that security required the elimination of potential threats regardless of their distance from Mongol territory. The Khwarezmid campaign, beginning in 1219 CE, showcased the full maturation of Mongol military and organizational capabilities. The logistics required to move over 100,000 warriors across thousands of miles of desert and mountain terrain demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination, capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of any contemporary power. The systematic destruction of cities like Otrar, Bukhara, and Samarkand revealed the ruthless efficiency that made Mongol expansion so successful and so terrifying to potential enemies. The psychological impact of Mongol conquests extended far beyond their immediate military victories. Stories of cities completely destroyed and populations massacred spread throughout the known world, creating a climate of fear that often caused enemies to surrender without resistance. This reputation for extreme violence was carefully cultivated by Genghis Khan and his generals, who understood that terror could be more effective than actual military force in achieving their objectives. The strategic use of psychological warfare became one of the most distinctive features of Mongol military doctrine. During the Western campaigns, Genghis Khan continued refining his approach to imperial administration and governance. The vast territories conquered during these expeditions required new methods of control and organization that went far beyond traditional Mongol tribal structures. He began implementing systems of taxation, trade regulation, and legal administration that could function across diverse cultures and geographic regions. These administrative innovations laid the foundation for the later Mongol Empire's remarkable stability and longevity. The diversity of peoples and cultures encountered during the Western expansion also influenced Mongol military and political development. Contact with Islamic scholars, Christian merchants, and Persian administrators exposed the Mongols to sophisticated governmental and commercial practices that they quickly adopted and adapted to their own needs. This cultural flexibility and willingness to learn from conquered peoples became one of the key factors in Mongol success, allowing them to govern effectively across an empire that eventually spanned from Korea to Eastern Europe. Genghis Khan's personal involvement in military campaigns continued throughout his conquests, as he believed that effective leadership required direct participation in the dangers and hardships faced by his warriors. This hands-on approach to command earned him tremendous loyalty from his followers, while providing him with detailed knowledge of military operations and enemy capabilities. His presence on battlefields also served important symbolic purposes, demonstrating to both allies and enemies that the Supreme Khan shared the risks of conquest with his humblest warriors. The administrative structure of the growing Mongol Empire reflected Genghis Khan's understanding that successful conquest required more than military victory. He established a sophisticated system of communication using mounted messengers that could transmit orders and information across thousands of miles in remarkably short periods. This communication network, known as the YAM, became one of the most advanced postal systems in the medieval world and enabled effective coordination across the vast territories under Mongol control. Religious tolerance became another hallmark of Mongol governance under Genghis Khan's leadership. Unlike many medieval conquerors who sought to impose their own religious beliefs on conquered populations, the Mongols generally allowed local communities to maintain their traditional faiths and practices. This policy reflected both practical considerations about maintaining stability in diverse territories and Genghis Khan's personal belief that different peoples might have access to divine truth through their own cultural traditions. The economic policies implemented by Genghis Khan transformed the Mongol Empire into one of the most prosperous and commercially active regions in the medieval world. By protecting trade routes and establishing uniform standards for weights, measures, and currency, the Mongols facilitated unprecedented levels of commercial exchange across Eurasia. The famous Silk Road reached its peak during the Mongol period, as merchants could travel safely from Europe to China under the protection of Mongol authorities. The legal system codified in the Yasa represented one of Genghis Khan's most significant contributions to world civilization. This comprehensive legal code established uniform standards of justice that applied to all peoples within the Mongol Empire, regardless of their ethnic or cultural background. The emphasis on merit-based advancement, religious tolerance, and protection for merchants and travelers created a framework for governance that was remarkably progressive for its time and contributed significantly to the empire's stability and prosperity. As Genghis Khan aged, he began considering the question of succession and the long-term survival of the empire he had created. Unlike many medieval rulers who simply designated their eldest sons as heirs, he implemented a more complex system that distributed authority among his sons while maintaining central coordination under supreme leadership. This approach reflected his understanding that the vast territories conquered by the Mongols required specialized knowledge and capabilities that no single individual could possess. The training and education of Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons received careful attention as he prepared them for future leadership responsibilities. Each potential heir was given opportunities to command military campaigns and govern conquered territories under his supervision, allowing them to develop the skills necessary for effective rule. This systematic approach to leadership development helped ensure that the Mongol Empire would continue expanding and prospering after its founder's death. The final campaigns of Genghis Khan's life focused on completing the conquest of the Western Xia and eliminating the last sources of resistance to Mongol authority in northern China. These operations, conducted during the mid-1220s CE, demonstrated that even in his 60s, the Great Khan remained an effective military commander, capable of performing complex operations across rugged terrain. The systematic destruction of Western Xia resistance ensured that future Mongol leaders would not face threats from this quarter while providing valuable experience for the next generation of commanders. Throughout his conquests, Genghis Khan maintained strong connections to his Mongol homeland and the cultural traditions of his people. Despite ruling over millions of sedentary subjects in sophisticated urban civilizations, he continued to live primarily in traditional felt tents and to participate in the seasonal migrations that characterized steppe life. This connection to his roots helped maintain loyalty among his original Mongol followers, while demonstrating that success had not corrupted his essential character. The scope of Genghis Khan's achievement becomes apparent when considering the state of the world at the time of his death in 1227 CE. In just over 2 decades, he had transformed a collection of fractious nomadic tribes into the dominant military and political force across much of Asia. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, encompassing territories that included portions of modern-day Mongolia, China, Central Asia, Iran, and Afghanistan. This represented the largest contiguous land empire in human history, achieved through a combination of military genius, political innovation, and administrative excellence. The military legacy of Genghis Khan extends far beyond his specific conquests to encompass revolutionary changes in warfare and the army organization, the army that influenced combat throughout the medieval period and beyond. The Mongol emphasis on mobility, coordination, and psychological warfare became standard elements of military doctrine across Eurasia, while their innovations in siegecraft and logistics provided models that later commanders would study and emulate. The professional army structure created by Genghis Khan, based on merit rather than birth, represented a fundamental departure from traditional feudal systems and contributed to more effective military organizations throughout the medieval world. The political and administrative innovations introduced by Genghis Khan had equally significant long-term impacts on world history. The concepts of religious tolerance, merit-based advancement, and protection for merchants and travelers became fundamental principles of governance that influenced political development across Eurasia for centuries. The legal and administrative systems codified in the Yasa provided frameworks for justice and governance that transcended cultural and ethnic boundaries, creating precedents for later attempts at international law and cooperation. The economic impact of Mongol expansion under Genghis Khan's leadership transformed commercial relationships across the known world. The protection provided to merchants and the standardization of weights, measures, and currency facilitated unprecedented levels of international trade and cultural exchange. The prosperity generated by this commercial activity contributed to technological and cultural developments that might not have occurred without the stability and security provided by Mongol governance. The cultural and intellectual legacy of Genghis Khan's conquests includes the preservation and transmission of knowledge across vast distances and between different civilizations. Mongol tolerance for diversity and their practice of relocating skilled individuals to areas where their expertise was needed facilitated unprecedented levels of technological and intellectual exchange. Chinese printing technology, Islamic astronomical knowledge, and European mechanical innovations all spread more rapidly across Eurasia due to Mongol facilitation of cultural contact and communication. The demographic impact of Mongol expansion under Genghis Khan's leadership was enormous, affecting population distributions and genetic patterns across much of Asia and Europe. While the immediate effects included significant population displacement and mortality in conquered territories, the long-term consequences included increased genetic diversity and cultural mixing that contributed to the development of new hybrid civilizations. Modern genetic studies suggest that a significant percentage of Asian and European populations carry genetic markers that can be traced to the Mongol expansion period. The environmental impact of Mongol conquests reflects both the destructive and constructive aspects of their expansion. While the systematic destruction of agricultural systems in some conquered territories caused significant ecological damage, the Mongol emphasis on pastoral nomadism and their protection of trade routes also contributed to environmental recovery in many regions. The reduction in warfare between previously hostile neighbors allowed damaged ecosystems to recover, while the movement of people and goods facilitated The spread of agricultural and technological innovations, the religious and philosophical implications of Genghis Khan's conquests extended far beyond the immediate political and military consequences of Mongol expansion. The Mongol practice of religious tolerance and their willingness to incorporate diverse spiritual traditions into their governmental system challenged contemporary assumptions about the relationship between political authority and religious orthodoxy. This approach influenced later developments in religious thought and political theory across multiple civilizations. The artistic and architectural legacy of the Mongol period reflects the cultural synthesis that occurred as a result of Genghis Khan's conquests. The mixing of artistic traditions from China, Persia, Central Asia, and other conquered territories produced distinctive hybrid styles that influenced aesthetic development across Eurasia. The Mongol patronage of artists and artisans from diverse cultural backgrounds facilitated unprecedented levels of artistic exchange and innovation. The linguistic impact of Mongol expansion included the spread of the Mongol language as a diplomatic and commercial lingua franca across much of Asia, while also facilitating the preservation and transmission of local languages and literary traditions. The Mongol practice of employing educated administrators from conquered peoples helped maintain cultural continuity while also promoting linguistic and scholarly exchange between different civilizations. The technological innovations that occurred during the Mongol period often resulted from the systematic exchange of knowledge and expertise facilitated by Genghis Khan's administrative policies. Chinese inventions like gunpowder and printing spread westward along Mongol trade routes, while Islamic astronomical instruments and European mechanical devices moved eastward. This technological diffusion accelerated innovation and development across the entire Mongol Empire. The educational and scholarly traditions that developed under Mongol rule reflected their pragmatic approach to governance and their recognition that effective administration required educated personnel from diverse backgrounds. The Mongol support for schools, libraries, and scholarly institutions helped preserve and transmit knowledge across cultural and linguistic boundaries while also promoting new syntheses of learning that drew from multiple intellectual traditions. The medical and scientific advances that occurred during the Mongol period often resulted from the systematic exchange of knowledge between practitioners from different cultural traditions. Chinese medical techniques, Islamic pharmaceutical knowledge, and European surgical practices all spread more rapidly across Eurasia due to Mongol facilitation of scholarly contact and communication. This medical exchange contributed to improvements in healthcare and life expectancy across much of the known world. As Genghis Khan lay dying in his tent during the summer of 1227 CE, he could reflect on achievements that exceeded the wildest ambitions of any previous conqueror. From his humble origins as the son of a minor tribal chieftain, he had risen to become the ruler of the largest empire in human history, commanding the loyalty of millions of followers across dozens of different cultures and civilizations. His military genius had revolutionized warfare, his political innovations had created new models of governance, and his administrative systems had facilitated unprecedented levels of prosperity and cultural exchange. The immediate cause of Genghis Khan's death remains uncertain, with various accounts suggesting illness, injury from a hunting accident, or complications from wounds received in battle. What is certain is that his passing marked the end of an era in world history, as no subsequent conqueror would match his combination of military brilliance, political acumen, and administrative innovation. The empire he created would continue expanding under his successors, eventually encompassing territories from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia. Still, the fundamental character and direction of Mongol expansion had been established by his personal vision and leadership. The testament and final instructions of Genghis Khan reflected his understanding of the challenges facing his successors and his determination to ensure the continued unity and expansion of the Mongol Empire. His division of authority among his sons and his emphasis on maintaining the military and administrative systems he had created provided a framework for continued success, while also recognizing the practical limitations of governing such vast and diverse territories. The wisdom and foresight demonstrated in these final preparations helped ensure that the Mongol Empire would remain a dominant force in world affairs for generations after its founder's death. The genetic legacy of Genghis Khan extends far beyond his immediate family to encompass millions of descendants scattered across Asia and Europe. Modern genetic studies suggest that a significant percentage of the population in former Mongol territories carries genetic markers that can be traced to the Mongol expansion period, reflecting both the scope of their conquests and the long-term demographic impact of their empire. This biological inheritance represents a permanent reminder of the extraordinary individual whose vision and leadership transformed the medieval world. The historical assessment of Genghis Khan's life and achievements continues to evolve as scholars gain new perspectives on the complexity and significance of his accomplishments. While earlier historians often focused primarily on the destructive aspects of Mongol expansion, contemporary scholarship increasingly recognizes the constructive contributions of Mongol governance to world civilization. The religious tolerance, legal innovations, commercial protection, and cultural exchange facilitated by Mongol rule created precedents and established patterns that influenced global development for centuries. The moral and ethical questions raised by Genghis Khan's methods and achievements remain subjects of ongoing debate and discussion. The systematic use of terror and violence that characterized Mongol military campaigns clearly caused enormous suffering and destruction. At the same time, the administrative and cultural innovations of Mongol governance contributed significantly to human progress and development. This complex legacy defies simple moral judgments and requires careful consideration of both the immediate costs and long-term benefits of Mongol expansion. The strategic and tactical innovations developed by Genghis Khan continue to influence military thought and practice in the modern world. His emphasis on mobility, coordination, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare provided models that contemporary military leaders study and adapt to current conditions. The professional army organization he created, based on merit rather than social status, established principles that remain fundamental to effective military leadership. The diplomatic and political precedents established by Genghis Khan's approach to international relations had lasting impacts on the development of international law and diplomacy. His systematic use of ambassadors, his emphasis on treaty obligations, and his practices regarding the treatment of prisoners and civilians established standards that influenced subsequent diplomatic practices across Eurasia. The Mongol concept of universal empire, while ultimately unsuccessful, provided a model for later attempts at international cooperation and unity. The economic and commercial systems developed under Genghis Khan's leadership created the foundation for the first truly global economy, as trade routes established during the Mongol period connected Europe, Asia, and Africa in unprecedented ways. The protection provided to merchants, the standardization of weights and measures, and the facilitation of currency exchange created commercial practices that influenced economic development for centuries. The prosperity generated by Mongol commercial policies demonstrated the benefits of free trade and economic cooperation across cultural and political boundaries. In death, as in life, Genghis Khan remained connected to the land of his birth and the traditions of his people. According to Mongol custom, his body was returned to the steppes of Mongolia for burial in a secret location that has never been discovered despite centuries of searching. This final mystery adds to the legend of a man whose life encompassed such extraordinary achievements that they continue to inspire wonder and debate nearly 8 centuries after his death. The location of his tomb remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved mysteries, a fitting end for someone whose life defied conventional understanding and whose legacy continues to influence the modern world. The bloodline that began with mythical wolves on the shores of Lake Baikal and progressed through generations of tribal chieftains had produced the greatest conqueror in human history, a man whose vision and leadership created an empire that spanned continents and whose innovations in warfare, governance, and administration influenced the development of civilization itself. The genetic, cultural, and institutional legacy of Genghis Khan continues to shape our world today, ensuring that the name of Temüjin, the boy born clutching a blood clot who became the universal ruler, will never be forgotten.